Okay, hello, welcome back. It's another video focusing on data analysis. And again, what I'm talking about is tidying up your data, wrangling your data to get it into some sort of condition where you can conduct statistical analysis. And we're working again using Jupyter Notebook, and I'm using Python and the various software libraries, specifically pandas in this case, to manipulate and organize data into nice neat series and data frames essentially. So what I'm going to do in this particular video is demonstrate how to aggregate data using multiple functions, and I'm going to use a data set that I've got on my computer. It's kind of a multi-level data, so it contains data set. It contains data from a repeated measures design. So participants contribute data. The same participants contribute data at multiple time points within the data set. Okay, so what I'm going to show is how I'll also show how to kind of append aggregate variables to an existing data set and some of the issues you might encounter. So what I'm talking about here is aggregating by multiple functions. What it might be useful to do sometimes when we have a data set is aggregate a particular variable, such as sum it or work out a mean or something like that. And then also look at that in a more granular way. So aggregate or sum up a particular variable, but look at the differences, split that between conditions or levels or groups of one of the other variables. So those are the sorts of things that we will look at in this video. Okay, so I'm going to start by, as usual, importing pandas as PD and NumPy as NP. And I'm going to import a data set. I'm going to call it pre_post, and I'm going to use the pandas pd.read_csv method, and I'm going to pass this string object which represents the name of the file as it's saved in a folder on my computer. It's called new long multi-level data file.csv. And if I run that cell, so what I now have is a data frame object, a pandas data frame object that has imported that particular spreadsheet. And if I use the .head method on the pre-post object, you can see here some of the variables in the first 5 rows of data. So I've called it pre-post because there's there are the repeated measures aspect of it. There is data collected at 2 different time points. One is pre and the other is post. So what that means is people played a game. The game lasted however many rounds, and in that game an economic game where they consumed certain amounts of a resource, and there were 2 stages to the game. The first stage was prior to the resource being depleted or reduced, and then the second was after the resource had been depleted or reduced. So pre was before the resource depleted for the first time, post was after the resource depleted for the first time. So there are a number of variables here. So we've got mean consumption and number of rounds that a game lasted. So what you can see here is 0 for pre-post depletion, and the other level of this condition is 1. So 0 represents pre-depletion, 1 would represent post-depletion. And you can see like the participant 1 here, their mean consumption pre-depletion was 30 units, and their game lasted 5 rounds pre-depletion. And they also will have contributed some rounds to the game post-depletion in most cases. So if their game lasted more than 5 rounds, then their post-depletion, there will be a couple of rounds as well, or maybe more in fact, and they will have a post-depletion mean consumption as well. So you can see this is a within subjects design or repeated measures design, whatever people like to refer to it as. And if I run this .info method, you can see here we've got a number of different variables. we've got 364 data points. There's missing data on some of them, as you can see there. Doesn't matter too much because we're not going to do too much with this. In many cases, they have been imported correctly, but in other cases not. So mean consumption has been imported as an object string, which it is not. It's a floating point, and some of these condition and pre-post, which are actually categorical, have been imported as integers. Not too much of an issue for us in this particular case. That's something I will address in a different video, though. So if we wanted to look at a specific participant, say participant whose ID number is 1, and see how many rounds in total of the game they played, or how many rounds in total their game lasted, we could use that. What we could do is we could use this dot sum method, and what I'm doing here is I'm basically selecting the pre-post data frame object that we've imported, and then in brackets I'm putting in pre-post again dot person ID. Okay, so what that means is I'm saying this particular data frame and the person ID variable. Yeah. So you can see that's exactly how the person ID variable is spelled, with a capital P and capital I and D. And then I'm saying I want that to be exactly equal to, so a double equal sign, 1. So what I'm saying is, with this particular bit of syntax, I'm saying from the pre-post data frame object, the participant whose ID is exactly equal to 1, select that, and then select the rounds variable, and then sum. So what this will do is find, if I run that will find and count the number of rounds for every entry relating to the person whose participant ID number is 1. And as you can see there, there's 7. If we go back up and look at the original data frame, this is person whose ID is 1, and you can see pre-depletion there were 5 rounds, so that tells us if their total number of rounds was 7, that tells us that post-depletion they must have played a further 2 rounds. Okay, so that's just kind of one way of sort of aggregating, summing up, where you've got multiple data point entries for a participant in a data frame. We could have done that, so I just selected one particular individual to do that, to demonstrate there, but we could have done that and worked out the total rounds for each participant by and again all we'd be doing is summing up their entry for the number of rounds pre-depletion and the number of rounds post-depletion. And to do that, what we would do is select our data frame object and use this group by method. Okay, notice on this occasion that it's slightly different here, that I've actually had to pass the person ID variable in as a string rather than just stating it as I did there. So I've had to put it surround it in single quotes. And again, I'm asking for rounds. I'm using the sum method, and I've added the head method on here. So what this will do is it will group together the scores relating to the participant's identity number, and it will sum up the rounds for every participant. So I'll put a 10 in there, and we'll get the first 10 rows of data by running that. And there you can see participant 1, 7 rounds, participant 2, 7 rounds, participant 3, 12 rounds, participant 4, 12 rounds, etc. Notice these are kind of like the two next to each other are frequently the same, and that's because these two participants 1 and 2 played against each other. So for both those participants, the game lasted 7 rounds. Likewise with participant 3 and 4, it's an indication they played against each other. But okay, so what I've demonstrated there is how you could, if you've got a within subjects design, you've got multiple data points by the same participant, you can do different things to kind of aggregate their scores on a certain variable. So what we've done is just taken their scores and added the number that's taken their scores for the number of rounds the game lasted, and we've added their number of rounds pre-depletion and the number of rounds post-depletion to give us a total. I did that for one participant, and I've done it for the whole of the data frame, all the participants, and I've just selected the first 10 here just to show that, rather than asking for all 364. Okay, but we're not limited to aggregating by a single function such as sum. We can use something called the aggregate method, and pass it a list of functions such as sum and count. So here, what I'm going to do is sum the number of rounds for each participant, and then also add a count of the number of data points that each one contributes. Okay, so if I run that, what you will see is we've got this nice new pandas data frame. We've got some of the sum rate relates to rounds, and I've just specified here the name that I want I want the column to have, a sum. So this is a sum of the number of rounds each game lasted, and the count is how many data points were summed, essentially, and that's 2. It's 2 for everyone in this case because there were only two conditions, so pre and post. So some of these rounds relate to pre and some of them relate to post. So each participant is contributing a score for the number of rounds pre-depletion and 1 post-depletion. Okay, and if you remember with our first participant, it was like 5 pre and 2 post. So they only contributed scores twice, essentially, in relation to this. Okay, so interestingly, what we could do is we've got this kind of new variable for the sum of the total number of rounds that again we've got rounds here split pre and post, but we've now got this new variable that's counted their total number of rounds the game lasted. And if we wanted to combine the output of that aggregation, that sum function for total rounds, with the data frame, so we might want to create a new column listing the total number of rounds for each player. And this was calculated using the sum method, but because sum's an aggregation function, it returns a reduced version of the data frame. Okay, so you'll see what that means in a minute. So the output for the aggregated rounds variable is smaller than the original rounds variable. Okay, so what I've done here to illustrate this, I've used the length function, which will just tell us the length of this particular variable, and then I've passed it the group by person ID rounds.sum that we used above. Okay, and if I run that, what you will see is it's 182 entries long. So we actually have 182 participants in this data set, but because they provide data points at 2 time points, the total length of the data frame is 364, as we can see up here. So this, you can see from this is obviously half the data frame. So we've got a problem if we wanted to append this new total rounds variable to the original data frame. It would be like half the length of the data frame, and we'd get some sort of error. If I run the second one, this should illustrate the actual there we go. 364 shows the length of the full data frame for the rounds variable. Okay, so if we did want to create a new variable for total number of rounds, what we'd need to do is append that twice, essentially. So we'd have to double the length of it. So it was 364 participants or observations long. So that effectively means duplicating the first 182 entries twice, so that pre-depletion each participant has a total rounds recorded next to them, and post depletion they have the same duplicate information effectively. So the way we can do this is by using what's known as the transform method, which will return the same data, but it will transform the aggregated variable, so our total rounds variable, so it's the correct shape, the correct length as the original data frame. And in order to do that, I'm going to create this new object, total rounds, and I'm going to set that equal to, assign that to pre-post, obviously our data frame object. I'm going to use this group by method again and pass in person ID, and then I'm going to pass in rounds, that's what we're interested in, and then I'm going to use the transform method, and I'm going to specify that I want to sum. And if I run this and just ask it to output the length of total rounds, you can see it's now 364. So all it's done is taken those 182 entries here and stacked the exact same 182 entries on top of one another. And now what we can do is we could take this new object here and assign it as a variable and append it to the data frame. So that's what I'm going to do here is I'm saying the pre-post data frame object, let's create a new variable called total rounds, and that is and we're going to assign that the total rounds object that I created here. Okay, and if we run this and ask for the first 10 lines, we can see that we now have this new total rounds object here. It shows the total number of rounds, and it'll run, if we read through these down to 182 and then read from 183 to 364, we'd see like that to duplicate the information twice, but it has allowed us to append that. So why is that useful? We've got duplicate information. Well, perhaps we'd want to use this to create some other variable that might be useful. And what we could do here is perhaps we might want to work out the percentage of the total number of rounds pre and post. And the way we could do this is by creating a new variable. So pre-post percent of total, I've called it here. We're going to create a new variable and attach it to this pre-post data frame. And that is going to consist of this particular calculation, which is a division. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our pre-post rounds. Yeah, so we're going to take this variable rounds here and each score in it, and we're going to divide it by our total rounds. So we're going to divide it by this total rounds. Okay, and if I run that, what you can see is gives us a percentage, a proportion for that represents the total rounds pre and post. So let me explain what that means. So here we've got 5 rounds pre-depletion for participant 1 from a total of 7, and 5 divided by 7 is about 0.71. So about 71% of the rounds played by participant 1 were played pre-depletion. And what we'd find is if we wanted to, we could print out the whole data frame and scroll down and find participant 1's post depletion. Then what we'd see there is 2 divided by 7, and that would be the difference between these. So it'd be about 29%. So 71% was pre-depletion, about 29% was post-depletion. Similar for the others as well. So in this case, we can see here participant 9 in total they played 9 rounds. 3 of those rounds were pre-depletion, so 3 out of 9 is about 33%. It's about a third of the rounds. So 2/3 of the rounds for this particular game played between participants 9 and 10 occurred after the resource had been depleted. So hopefully that's useful. What I wanted to demonstrate was that there are lots of ways we can kind of aggregate existing variables to create new variables. And in the next video, I'll kind of develop this a little bit more, and we'll look at pivot tables and contingency tables.